All right, welcome everyone to our February meeting of our Marketing and Market Research Tableau user group. If I can, there we go. That's us. So our agenda today, we'll give you a quick intro to the leadership team in case you haven't attended one of our events before, have a few announcements, and we'll take some time to meet a community member or two, and then we'll dive into our featured presentation today, which is going to be delivered by Jonathan Drummey, and it's going to be about multi-fact analysis in Tableau. So very excited to hear Jonathan. And then you can stick around. We'll have some networking and a swag giveaway at the end. So stick around for that. So quick intro of our team here in the TUG. So I'm Josh Wilson. I'm an independent consultant. I do market research analytics. So that could include anything from designing a survey to analyzing, sometimes often with Tableau, and doing other fun stuff like predictive modeling and segmentations and things like that. And I'm in Chicago. Yeah, and Sharon is here as well. And Sharon's on mute.
Hi, everyone. Sharon here from San Jose, California. I'm also a data analytics consultant. I enjoy and am passionate about helping business leaders answer their business questions using data. I work mostly with marketing teams, finance teams, and do also market research and survey data analysis work. Sarah, you want to go ahead?
Great.
Great, thanks, Sharon. I'm Sarah Pallett. I'm a Tableau consultant. I do Tableau freelance projects. I love building dashboards and doing Tableau enablement. And I'm also a Tableau ambassador. Love sharing knowledge and building bridges within the community. Luigi, I'll pass it over to you.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Luigi. My camera's broken and I need to restart my computer, so my apologies. I live in San Diego, California. I'm vice president of operations for a linear and CTV media buying agency, and I'm designing our dashboards and our data here. And I'm excited to hear Jonathan speak. He's fantastic, and I can't wait to see you all at the Tableau conference in less than 50 days now.
All right. Looking forward to that as well. All right, let's have a couple announcements here. We have a Slack channel. So there's a QR code there if you want to join us. We post about our events, and if you have any questions or any anything that comes up when we have, you can message us in there, and we can help you out. Then we also have, if you go to the DataFam Tableau user group YouTube channel, there's all many of the Tableau user group recordings are there, including ours. If you want to see any of our past meetings, you could also just go to our page. So like as you have signed up for this event, if you go to our page, our main page from there, you can look at our past events, and the recordings of those events should be posted on the event page, as this recording will be posted as well. Our next meeting is going to be in just a few weeks. We're going to have the Flurridge twins coming to once again deliver their top how to do cool stuff in Tableau. So we're excited to have them back once again this year, and that will be on March 13th. A couple of other announcements to save the date. This week there's an analytics Tableau user group meetup, which I believe is the most popular, most well attended generally meetup, and they always have fantastic speakers there. This week they actually have some people from Tableau coming to do some demos and share some inside stories one of which being Matthew Miller. So check that out if you're interested. And then, of course, the Tableau conference will be in April. So looking forward to seeing many of you there. All right. So what we usually do is we like to hear from everyone who's on the call, or from a few of you at least. Maybe if you're new here, or if you haven't introduced yourself, we'd love to hear from you. If you want to just step in and tell us what your name is, who do you work for, what's your role, and what's your general experience with Tableau and with market research or marketing, and anything that you excel at and or struggle with. We like to hear about that, because sometimes that can inform what we want to, what sort of speakers we want and topics we want to talk about in future events. So anyone want to jump in? You can just take yourself off mute.
Hey, I'll go first. My name is Jonathan Pop. I'm at Accept Credit Union. I'm the Director of Marketing here. I used to be the Tableau user group leader for the Portland PDX Tableau group, but I moved up to the Seattle area. And yeah, I'm just want to see like different data visualization ideas and sort of the infrastructure behind different dashboards.
Great. Well, you're in the right place. Thanks for coming. Anyone else? Got to have at least one more person. I heard someone come off mute. Julius?
I'll go ahead and go. Hi everyone. I'm not 100% sure if I introduced myself last time. I feel like this is my second time attending. But I'm Julius. I work in professional baseball for the Los Angeles Angels. So I'm the senior manager of business analytics. I'm actually based out of San Diego, but I come up to Anaheim 3 days a week. So, but yeah, I've been working with Tableau for about, I want to say 8 years now, actually. So I mostly work in ticketing and more the sales analytics side. A little bit of marketing. We're getting introduced to a little bit more data sources through MLB. So more so just here to listen and learn through my peers. So yeah, excited to be a part of this.
Great. Welcome. Anyone else?
We might have one more in the chat. Ali mentioned looking for the unmute button. I'm not sure, Josh, as a host, if you're able to unmute them, or...
That's a great question. Let me see. Ali Gilbert? No, I don't think so. Sorry. It doesn't say that Ali is muted, so it could be a local mic issue. I'm not sure. So
okay, no worries.
Maybe at the end, if Ali, if you get that figured out, then we can come back to you. All right. Well, with that, we'll jump in, and I will let Sharon introduce Jonathan.
So hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to have Jonathan here, both because he's Jonathan, as many of you know, he's a Tableau Visionary Hall of Famer, but also I think he's perfectly positioned to talk about multi-fact analysis. There aren't that many people who truly understand what's happening under the hood in Tableau. And honestly, I'll just share a personal story here that I am of the camp of I do my joins myself, so that I see, how things, what's happening kind of, and I like that control. But because of Jonathan, I've been able to kind of open my mind to the possibilities of relationships and relating tables with multi-fact analysis. This is not for the faint of heart topic. And even if today you feel like this is kind of speeding ahead, please feel free to come to Slack, to our Slack channel, and ask questions. And I think Jonathan is really always happy to talk about this topic and help explain to those who want to understand. So Jonathan, please take it away. And thank you so much for creating the content for today. We created, Jonathan created specific content that would be relevant for our group. And please go ahead.
All right. Thanks for that, Sharon. Also, in full disclosure, Sharon and I are actually both colleagues at the Action Company, used to be Action Analytics. So hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan Drummey. I'm based in Maine, and I'm an analytics strategist at Action. And my primary client is one of the largest Tableau deployments in the world, where I support users doing all sorts of different things in hardware and software development and assorted marketing analytics and pretty much everything else. So I get to be exposed to a lot in my daily work with this particular topic. And let me start sharing my screen. Share entire screen. Great. I've been working with Tableau on features around data modeling for almost a decade now, which is kind of crazy to think about. And asking them questions about, hey, Tableau, why can't this be easier? And as they're proposing new things, talking about that. So I'll be sharing some of that as we go today. So as far as an agenda in the next 45, 50 minutes or so, to talk about data blends and relationships, because when we're talking about multi-fact relationships, they're built on everything that's come before in Tableau. And in working with other people and exposing them to this, a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of all of these technologies in Tableau and how they work. So we want to kind of orient you to that so we can start talking about the multi-fact relationships and using them. So with that, we will dive right in, and I'm going to use an example. I used to work in public health, and we've got some really great examples there. So I'm going to start out with that and switch over to Tableau here. So here I've got a set of data of cases. So this might be like malaria cases, COVID cases, etc. So we have facilities, different months. Not every facility is reported for every month, and there's a positive count and a tested count for those. So that's our case data. And then we want to generate some sort of population adjusted rate for the data. And so we have population data. And the population data is at the level of year, and then we have a census of the population associated with that facility. And so historically in Tableau, we would join that data together to get it to work. So I'll just show this data source here, where I've joined my case data to my population data on the facility and the year. And I've set it up as a full outer join because I have facilities and years that don't exist in the case data as I'm working with it. So in the join data, kind of looking as it there, and because I did the full outer join and we've got some nulls, I had to create a coalesced field to kind of work with that. And then here's my dates and everything. And one thing here is the census data is being replicated for each record in the data. So for example, if I remove the date, then those census numbers jump way up from 32 to 128 because we have multiple records. There's 4 records for each original census value. And so if we're familiar with this in Tableau, we're like, oh, great, we'll use a level of detail expression to solve that. But if we're not, then we start doing things like, I just want to write a case rate of like, what is my positive divided by my sum of census? And if I drag that in, this number is actually wrong because what I want is that facility year level census. So instead of 8 cases divided by 128, I want to do an 8 divided by 32. So then we end up having to know to write the level of detail expression to deal with replication that's in the data. And so now I'm seeing that 32 number, and then I can do a case rate revised, sum of positive divided by my sum of population LOD to do a revised value, and then I'm getting an accurate number. And it's great in Tableau that we can do this, but it's also really terrible to be teaching people how to work with population data in Tableau. And on the first day of Tableau training, we have to teach people to use level of detail expressions. Not the easiest thing in the world to teach people. So that's working with joints. In doing that, we have replication, we can do level of detail expressions. Now, Tableau also introduced this other technology of data blends. So in the case of data blends, instead of joining multiple tables in the same data source, we are working across multiple Tableau data sources. So here I have my case data and my population data, and then I can drag in my census, and then make sure in my census I'm blending on both the facility and the year. And we have the blue icon indicating my primary data source, the orange icon on here indicating my secondary data source. If you understand SQL, this is kind of a post-aggregate left join of my secondary to my primary. And then I can do something like write that case rate as sum of positive divided by sum of my blend population from the census, and then I'm getting accurate case rates out of this. So this is great. However, like I said, this is a post-aggregate left join. So for example, in our population data, I'll just use view data here. I have a ZHGR facility in my data, and I can't see that in this because I'm using facility from my primary data source. So it's not acting like a full outer join in any way. It's a left join that's after aggregation. So there's these limits with what we can do with data blending. Switching back to Keynote here. So in our Tableau data sources, back in the day, before relationships came out, we could have one or more connections in each data source, and then we do SQL joins between the different tables. And then we had the data blending technology, which would let us work across multiple data sources. So with blending, blending is a way to go across Tableau data sources, give us some more opportunities, but there's still some challenges with this. And one of the things that happens here in our data with these joins is I've taken all of these records in the data and gotten replication. So I actually have more rows in my data than I had in either data source due to this replication. And Kirk Monroe, who's on the call today, did a really fantastic slide that I was like, I tried to do my own version of it, and his was great. And I'm actually going to share all the links that are out of things I've stolen from in here. I'm just posting them all right now in the chat. So Kirk did this really great presentation at another TUG last year on this, and the link's here to watch it. And one of the ways when we think about joins is we're joining all these tables together, and we're ending up with all of these kind of cells in our data from all the results of this. within that. And if we switch to start thinking about, okay, is there another way we can do this with, and replacing this with relationships, which is kind of a post-aggregate join that can be at a row level, then we can end up with a data source that's much smaller. In working with relationships, that also gives us more opportunities to answer more questions with the data. And I'll do a demo of this in just a second. And to talk about this in kind of the higher level of where Tableau is going is with relationships was giving us a lot of the power of joins, this flexibility of data blends to do a post-aggregate join as a new feature in the tool. We can answer more questions out of the data. We can have a smaller data source. And I did a video on this with a set. In this case, this was primarily Salesforce data along with some financial data, looking at how much we were spending to win new grants and what those results were in terms of the awards we won, how much in dollars we were getting out of that. So kind of return on investment. And if I had tried to join all of these data sets together, it would have been trillions of records and an incredibly slow data source. And instead, I had something that was on the order of a few million records of data. And I could answer a lot of different questions with this data set. So this is what Tableau introduced in version 2020.2. And they made using relationships the default for setting up new data sources. So we could go in and start doing joins like we could, but otherwise we could use relationships. So in thinking about how relationships are done, those physical joins that we could set up are now our lower layer. And then if we want to, and then we have relationships as a layer above that. So we kept all of the capability of using physical joins, and then we can relate multiple logical tables, and we get that noodle there. And I have to put this not the same as a SQL join here, because for all of us who started using Tableau when we were writing SQL to do things, this is a big mental shift in doing this, where we're changing from standard SQL physical joins, left, inner, right, outer joins. And with relationships, what we're changing to is it's a runtime join, and it's a runtime post-aggregate join based upon the linking dimensions we set up, and whether we get the left, the inner, or the right semantics depends on the fields that we're using in the view. So let's go into a demo of that. Back to Tableau here. So in looking at the relationship, instead of doing a join, setting up a physical join between my cases and population like I've done previously, I'm relating them on facility and the year in this case. And then with my relationships, let me just start a new worksheet on this. I can have my facility of cases and my facility population here. And then here's my sum of positive as I'm using that. And so what I'm getting here in this case is a left join of my case data, of my population data to my facility case data. But when I add my census data, I'm now getting an outer join kind of effect. So when we're using relationships and we're using measures from different tables, we're triggering outer join behavior from whatever tables we're using those on. So we can see all of those missing values there, which go along with years that exist in one table. And I'll just do the option click and drag here so I can show the years from my dates that don't exist in the other. And then in terms of things like writing a case rate calculation, instead of having to write the LOD, I can just do my sum of positive divided by sum of census, and then I'm getting the accurate numbers that I'm expecting out of it. So relationships let us work with each of our logical tables at their own grain of the data and merge them together while keeping that grain of the data and reduce the need to write level of detail expressions. We're reducing replication in the data, and we can work with the tables independently of each other. So for example, if I'm just using the case data, so here's that case count. I have the records for each month. Let's just, for each of these, I'm seeing one row for each. I can do positive and tested. The query here is completely on the case table, isn't using the population table at all. Whereas if I had joined this together, every query I issue is going to be querying both tables. But since this is set up using relationships, these are independent logical tables. And then if I do something where I'm querying population, I can work with my population independently of my case data. So we can, in the same data source, we can answer more questions, work with our logical tables independently, work with our logical tables together as we need to. So more flexibility in one data source is the whole point of using relationships. So to just talk about some of this in different ways. So when we're doing physical joins, we're doing that row level join. Within blends, it's a post-aggregate left join. With relationships, it's also a post-aggregate join, but it depends on what kind of join type we get, depends on the fields we're using in the view. Gives us more flexibility there. Where blends, we're configuring each blend in each view. Relationships, we're configuring what fields we want to relate on in the data source, and then the fields in the view. That's part of how we get that flexibility within that. In terms of when to use them, physical joins, we're kind of locking in what that data source is like. So my tendency is going with Tableau's default. I'm going to use relationships first. There's places where I'll start using physical joins to help me with performance, and blends are really this backup solution now when we can't do different things. So maybe the data is only available as a published data source from another team, so I have to blend across published data sources at this point. And then for people who are used to using SQL, way of thinking of these, for blends, that's kind of like, I just need a few more columns from something, and it's kind of a subquery result. It's that post-aggregate left join for a data blend. With relationships, where they are dynamic, they do change based on the fields that we're using. There is a learning curve with using relationships, but it can ultimately, hopefully, have demonstrated that we can save space and time having the right level of detail expressions and writing other code with those. And then we're going to fill in this other part talking about the multi-fact. So just looking at questions, are we able to create relationships between published data sources? That will come maybe later this year, given Tableau's speed of development. Next year is more likely, I would say. So where I want to go now is talk about where relationships run into some issues, and this is where the multi-fact analytics and relationships start coming in. So let's say I've got some data, I've got manufacturer, materials, sales, purchases, and then both sales and purchases have a calendar table. Or here's another example. Both of these I grabbed off the Tableau forums, where I have a table of user authentication events, and then there's assorted other things that users have done on our system. And we want to relate each of these to a calendar table so we can plot everything on the same date axis. Instead of having two different date dimensions, we want one shared dimension in this case. So the way we can think about these tables going to kind of traditional data modeling ideas is that these are dimension tables holding the those core categorical attributes of our data, and the calendar is another dimension table. And then we have these fact tables that have the facts or those observations that are recorded about our business, like the individual sales or the notifications we're sending out or things like that. Now, one of the things, if I try to set up a data source like this, is that it's going to create a circular relationship. So if I'm trying to build a view with calendar and materials, I have to go, am I going to go through sales? Am I going to go through purchases? How do I look around this? So Tableau doesn't allow us to do that because this would create ambiguity in our data source and what we're trying to build. So in working with this, Tableau is kind of like, okay, how can we allow people to start doing this, doing this kind of relating with our data? And they came up with this notion of base tables. So here's that case data where I've related it to who are the attending physicians on the cases, the dates, the facilities, who are the managers of those facilities. So kind of a standard relationships data source. And let's say I want to relate in the population data across my facilities. Well, this would create that circular kind of join between population, dates, cases, facilities in doing that. So just kind of labeling our dimension tables, our fact tables here. So Tableau is not going to allow us to have those circular relationships. So with multi-fact relationships, we can kind of think of this like a tree, where at the base of our tree is that case data. And then we have another tree that we want to work with where we want to relate population to dates, population of facilities and management as another tree in our data. And Tableau kind of lays them out horizontally in the views here, which explains how the emoji are laid out that way. So we can have multiple base tables, and each base table is going to create its own tree. And the reason why I'm talking about trees and bringing in some iconography here is this affects how we can, what we can use with what, as we're talking more about them. And then with multi-fact relationships, what we're effectively doing is sharing tables across trees. So one of the very earliest name that Tableau used for the multi-fact analysis was shared dimensions, that these dimension tables of dates and facilities are now able to be shared across multiple data sources. So let's demo how to work with that. So here, if I have my multi-fact data, so here's that case data that's relating. If I hover over this case data, it's highlighted what is in this tree. So it's highlighted the attending, the dates, the facilities, and management, and we can see all the linking dimensions for that. So this is just standard relationships. And then with the population data, I've also related that to dates and to facilities in here with standard relationships. So on year, on facility, and population. And building this out, I'm going to demo building another multi-fact in a little bit here. So with this now, here's my my original date data that I have. Let me just bring out, let me just start a new worksheet, kind of easier to talk about with this. So I can have, this is just standard relationships. So if I'm dragging out fields from my case data, here's the number of facilities in each. We can see all the dates for them. So this is standard relationships in Tableau. I can work with this logical table, the case data independent of attending, independent of dates, facilities, management, and so on. of each other. Now, there is something that's different as we're looking at this. I've created a view here with facility date cases, and now there's some stuff that's grayed out. And this is Tableau's way of saying this population data is coming from a different tree in the data. So I can still work with it. And we'll talk about that more. But right now, Tableau's graying it out in a way to say, it's coming from a different tree. And this was a change in last year in one of the releases where grayed out does not mean hidden. So if I hide a field in the view and I do a show hidden fields, there's now this little visible, invisible icon here, which is different from grayed out because we're coming from different relationships. So let me just do a couple undos. So I'm not hiding that out. So let me just start a new worksheet here. So I can work with the data at the year level, for example, and I can sum up all of my cases. So year from my dates data, I have my sum of positive from my case data. And now here's, I can take my census data. So there's the year from the census data, and now Tableau has put this new icon here on the field on rows, indicating that is stitching or linking across multiple trees in the data. So if we look at the data source here, right now, dates, my year of dates is coming from this table, and it's stitching across these two base tables where I'm getting my case data and my census data. And then this is doing relationships. So I can write calculations like sum of positive divided by sum of census. And now this is happening based on the dimensions in the view. So at the year level, and if I want to start bringing in my facility data, I have some different facility fields. I'm going to bring in my facility from my facilities table. And there we're seeing that now broken out by the year and the facility. So this is, I'm going to highlight here one of the differences in that in our relationship data source, we had related these fields on these two dimensions, facility and year. So every time I'm relating the data, I'm working on both these fields together. Whereas in the multi-fact data source, if I switch over to this one, then I can choose at runtime to relate on dates or relate on facilities or relate on both by dragging in both fields in the view. So we get more flexibility in how we want to work with the data in doing this. And that's the whole point of Tableau's evolution of these features, is to give us more options in working with one data source. So to just talk about this right now, we can set up data sources with multiple trees. So we can set up a case tree with a certain set of relationships to shared dimensions, population, and training, for example. And a way I think of setting up multi-fact data sources is X's instead of O's. So in the O sense, we want to create circular relationships. I want date to case to population. I want facility to cases to population and so on. Whereas what we end up here in setting up our multi-fact relationships is a bunch of X's of these different crosses of how we're relating our tables. So our base tables are on the left, our shared dimension tables are on the right, and we can start nesting our shared dimension tables. So some different use cases for this. Let's say we've got a set of conformed dimensions coming from a data warehouse that's been set up in a lovely way. We might try to think about it in terms of circular relationship like this. In a relationships-based data model, we can set it up like this: marketing going to dates to products to location and so on. Or another case, which kind of connects to the example I showed with the population and case data, where we have two fact tables that are related on multiple fields, like in this example, like month, model, and location, and maybe we want to be able to relate them separately or together. So we can do shared dimensions to set that up. Or in a case where maybe we've got multiple snowflakes of data that we want to connect together. And this is the example that Kirk used in his TUG talk of connecting these different data sources together. Or not data sources, but different snowflakes of data together. And we want to enable more questions to be answered in that one data source. So there's a number of different ways we can use multi-fact analysis in our data. And Sharon and I had created a little market data set, and I'll just do a little demo of that. So we have a data source of some different marketing metrics. So we've got some dimensions, campaigns, keywords, products, countries, business units, our ad spend, our impressions, our clicks. So kind of standard set of market data. And then I have a dimension table of all of my countries that's got some other columns, and I have a dimension table of my products. Now, let's say somebody's given us access to that magic data source of conversions, so we can actually start looking at our revenue based on our ad spend. And so we might want to I want to relate my conversion data. Let me just show this here. We've got countries, products, revenue dollars, units, quantity, really simple data source here. Maybe this has some other dimensions. Very often these will be at very different grains. So what I really want to do is relate it to both the country and the product table. I can't do both here. I can't connect this to this. So what I can do, I'm just going to remove this right now, is I can make my conversions another base table in my data model, and then I can relate my conversions to my countries, and I picked up the relationship on country ID, and then I can relate my conversions to my products. And so now I've set up a multi-fact data source. So I can work with my top of funnel metrics and my countries and my products, just like I did in standard relationships, but now I can also work with conversions. So having started with this, we now have a whole lot of different fields to work with. And I need to pay attention to the tables that I'm working with, but to just do a really simple one here, I'm going to take all my countries from my country data. I've got one row for each country here. And then I'm also going to take all of my products from my product data. And then when I do this, Tableau prompts me to say, hey, based on your data model, this field is unrelated. And unrelated in this case, what it means is these tables are right now coming out of different trees. So Tableau is not sure how to do it. And what Tableau is going to do is show all the possible combinations of product and country here. And I'm going to go ahead and add this. So now I'm seeing every product and country in the data. I've gotten a cross product. And we're also seeing in this icon, there's that shared dimension icon, and it's got the little slash through it to indicate this is not related data here. And I'll just drag out my products. So we're seeing all of this replicated, but now I'm going to drag out my ad spend. And so when I do this, changes, I've lost those different, because Tableau is able to now know how to work with this data. I've got ad spend for each country and product, and there's my ad spend across all of those. And then because this is the multi-fact analysis, I can start dragging in my revenue dollars here. So there's my revenue dollars for each of my country and products where things exist. We're seeing places where I have revenue without ad spend without revenue, and so on. And then I can create a calculated field on this. And just to save time easier, I'm just going to copy the formula that I already written to do the return on ad spend. So revenue minus ad spend divided by ad spend. So I'm working across these different base tables. I'm just going to call it ROAS here. And then let me just change my number format to percentage and drop that in. And now I have my return on ad spend across these tables, which could be at very different grains. There could be hundreds of millions of records in each of these, but I'm just relating them at the level of country and product. So just on 100 different values instead of trying to do some row level relationship that could create billions or trillions of records, higher level of detail expressions to deal with, and so on. So this is the kind of core idea of this multi-fact analysis, is that we can now have multiple trees of data. So I can have my conversions as a tree. I can have my top funnel metrics with measures across these two tables together by stitching them using those shared dimensions in my different trees. And I'm going to point out one more thing that I've already had some success in working with teams with, as far as one more demo of where fact can be useful. And in this case, year. So when we're relating tables historically, we are relating whatever grain we have to in the data. So in the case of, I have a date table, and maybe this is like a fiscal calendar table or something like that, and I have a row for every date at that finest grain that I care about in the data. So in this case, this is month in this data source. So anything using this basis to date is going to have to run at that date. So let's say this was data at the hour level, because we want to do some sort of analysis based on time, 24 hours per day times 365 days per year. I've got tens of thousands of rows of things I have to join on every time I want to generate a view. Well, with multi-fact analysis, we have more of an ability to relate at different levels. So, for example, if all I care about is relating at the year level, I can drop in another shared dimension table that just exists at the year level, and I just have 2 years in my data. So instead of potentially having to relate tens of thousands of things at runtime to build a view, I can just relate on 2 things and end up with much faster queries about it. So in this case, using year, as I can use, instead of the year out of my dates table, which is going to have to relate at the month level, 12 times as many records, I can relate at the year level in a view. So not only multi-fact gives us the opportunity to answer more questions with the same data source, we can actually answer our questions more efficiently with the same data source and get better performance out of it. So this is another option. And presented to us with multi-fact analysis. So I'm seeing somebody said, just wrap my head around, start using LODs. Yeah, it's, we can start doing more and more here, taking advantage of what Tableau can do for us. So I kind of add to this table and talk about multi-fact. So in multi-fact relationships, when we're working within the same tree of tables, logical tables, then our logic's the same as relationships. Or when we're using a stitching field across different logical tables, we get that effect. If we start dragging out the unrelated, then we get that cross-join effect where things are replicated. Configured the same as relationships. In terms of using it, there's this place where Tableau is even still kind of figuring out, okay, when do you want to use multi-fact versus regular relationships or joins? And for me, it's really about this situation where the data is related to each other. So like in this marketing case where we have our impressions and click data, and then we have conversions that could be at extremely different grains of data in working with that. Or this case where I don't want to relate on 3 fields at once, I want to relate on 1 field at a time. 2 sets of measures that can't be unioned together, as Kirk said, is a really good one. And this, why can't we do that with relationships problems? Like where we want to start creating that circular relationship, we can solve it with multi-fact relationships. So it is not always going to be used. It's really a subset of new features. And part of why Tableau has done this is a stepping stone to letting us do that relationships across published data sources. So Tableau's building that out. So let's talk some about related, unrelated, and stitching, diving into using this in practice. So here I'm using this cases and population data. I've added some other tables into this. So we've got a lot going on in this data source. And one of the things that we can see in here is if I do a search for facility, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different instances of facility as a dimension in this data source. And so here, these are all fields that I'm using in the same tree. Everything's just fine. Let's say I drag out facility from the population data. Then Tableau is going to prompt us to say, hey, this is an unrelated dimension. It's something coming from another tree. And we're starting to see this. And the point I'm going to point out here, this facility population, I've got 5 records here. I drag this out. And now I'm seeing 5 records or 6 records of facility population for each record of facility. My data has been replicated here. So this is a case we've dragged out unrelated fields in this. Whereas if I drag out facility from facilities, now I've got a table that is stitching those together, that we're able to connect the facility dimension from our population to the facility from our cases. So in this case, that facility from our facilities table is able to connect both to cases and population. So Tableau calls that a stitching dimension, as in stitching and sewing, to where it's able to link these tables together. So unrelated means not in the same tree. When we start dragging out unrelated things, we're going to get the warning, we're going to get the pill indicator on here. So the recommendation is to drag out our shared fields first. So we have to know our data model to be able to know what to drag out for shared fields. And then we can start dragging out unrelated tables if we want to. But as noted, that starts creating a cross join until we drag out things that are related. So this points to one of the things, if we want to start using multi-fact, we need to pay attention to our data model in using it in a way that we didn't necessarily have to so much previously. So in this case, this is something that Sharon and I, when we were putting together this demo data set for ad spend and revenue dollars, it's really easy to start creating something like this where we end up with, I drag out my country, I drag out my product, and suddenly I'm seeing a massive amount of replication of my revenue data. And so we need to pay attention to what are those icons showing us, what are the warnings that Tableau is giving us as we're working with the data. So one of the things I strongly suggest if you're going to start using this is it can be really easy to start dragging stuff in. So this was when I first created this data source, the names of the fields and tables that Tableau gave me on the left. And then here's where I started cleaning it up and doing this. So these are my current set of suggestions on this is identify our logical tables based on whether they're a base table or a shared dimension table. So we can start getting a sense of what that is. Then rename those fields. So instead of like country ID from conversions, that's got the name. I cleaned it up a little bit to make it easier. If we look at the top of funnel metrics, this country ID that was here, I've now renamed it to be country ID top to do that. So shared dimensions that I'm using, I just use those as like, if I'm thinking about business unit, I want to use the business unit shared dimension. So let's just call that business unit or product ID or product name, kind of what feels natural there. And then if I have something like keyword ID or campaign ID that's not shared anywhere and only exists in this, then I'm okay. I'm willing to use it as that kind of display name and not try to stick another name on it. And then whenever possible, I'm going to be hiding fields to avoid confusion in doing this. And so this points to something where I may have kind of my standard analysis that I've done as one Tableau data source. And when I start getting into multi-fact, I may create a separate Tableau data source to do the multi-fact to help avoid confusion in doing this. And adding things like field comments, hiding fields, and so on to help avoid those challenges because they can come up really fast and really quickly as we're working with that. And just to show an example of this as our use case with our market data is that, so I'm going to use my rename data here. So I can do something like region and business unit and do that return on ad spend across region and business unit really easily, which is fantastic. But then if I'm starting to add in something like campaign ID from my base table, for example, notice the way all of these changed a bunch. And so this is one of those, and the reason why is that we have in our data, we've got multiple campaigns for each country ID and business unit, and we're getting replication of our data, and we're seeing those shared dimension icons here. So we start needing to be more careful about what it is we're dragging out when. And if I had like, maybe I have a campaign ID that is a shared dimension table, that's the one I care about, I need to be paying attention to that. So let's talk about calculation sum. So I've done aggregate calculations here. Aggregate calculations are in the kind of just work sort of place. Row level calculations, as long as we're working within a logical table, they just work. When we're doing row level calculations between logical tables, they're using inner join logic. And this is standard relationships behavior and is one of those places where we really need to be familiar with how relationships work before we start using shared dimensions. We cannot do row level calculations across trees. This is a whole part of why I talk about trees as something important to pay attention to. because we're getting an error saying it's sort of like the ag-disag error that we get when we're trying to write a calculation. It's a long Tableau error message, but it's basically we can't do it across trees. And there may be like, oh, we're going to try to write a level of detail expression to return results from one tree, and can't do that either with row-level calculations. Aggregate calculations, they're okay everywhere. I'm just going to go back to if we want to cross trees, sometimes we need to start thinking about what is the level of detail that things are happening across the trees. And we start after using some of the techniques if we've used a bunch of data blending to work with there, like increasing the level of detail of the view and to get everything to work out right. So that's something to think about. Filters also start changing with shared dimensions. So if we have a regular dimension filter, that's applying to our tree, and if we've stitched across other trees, that's there. But if we have an unrelated tree, it is truly unrelated. We're getting a cross product across those different trees. The filter on one tree isn't going to affect that other tree. Data source filters, if it's from the base table, it's only going to apply to the tree. So just to show this as an example, if I drop a data source filter on my conversions table, then it's going to affect the results coming from the country table and the product table. It's not going to affect the top of funnel metrics because that is a separate base table. Whereas if we drop a data source filter on a shared dimension table, then it's going to affect all the trees that are touched by that table. So if I go back to Tableau here, I'm going to switch over to this one here. If I'm filtering, if I have a data source filter on years, that'll affect cases and population, but it's not going to touch the training, for example. If I drop something on attending, that's going to affect cases, facilities, management, dates, all of those, and years. It's not going to touch population and training. So data source filters start being more scoped in what they can do when we're talking about data source filters. And if we're using a calculated field that's crossing multiple tables in one tree, then we're going to start expanding to multiple trees. So data source filters, we got to pay attention to our data source. Extract filters are massively different. When we start using multi-fact, historically, extract filters apply to all of the tables in the extract. And that's one of the ways extract filters can cause performance issues sometimes, is we're getting this inner join logic from our extract filter across relationships that shouldn't be interjoined together in a view, but they are in the extract. We've had performance issues there. Now extract filters in a multiple base table data source only apply to the logical tables touched by that filter. And then there's a new feature coming in 2025.1 to just filter individual logical tables. And this was actually something I'd requested on day one with relationships. So I'm really excited about the possibilities with this. And just to give an example of that, from my work in healthcare data, is like we may have a data set, a data source that has all the encounters in our system. So all of our outpatient visits, all our emergency department visits, all of our inpatient visits. And there's orders of magnitude difference in those different data sources. And maybe all I care about is the inpatient visits in my data. So I just want to filter my encounters logical table just for my inpatient visits. Tableau's never given me an ability to just do that. So I end up having to write custom SQL or things like that, do upstream filtering of my data to deal with that. With 2025.1, we'll be able to drop a filter on just one logical table. So I could filter that logical table just for the inpatient visits. And there's a lot, or any of us who are doing things, we're in a company that sells a lot of different products and we're just responsible for one product. We can filter for just that product in that one logical table. So with talking about, kind of summing up here, row level calcs across tables start changing behavior depending on what is the context of that row level calculation based upon the kind of data source we're doing. Data source filters start depending on the context of what we're looking at. Same thing for extract filters as we're using multi-fact relationships. So to move on from this one and start wrapping up here. So when do we want to use multi-fact relationships? This is quote directly out of the Tableau documentation. This is one of those situations where I don't think of this as a feature of like, oh, just start using this. It's like, you need to understand relationships and know, and like, okay, this is where I need to add the multi-fact to this. So in thinking about enabling more questions to be answered from the same data source. So we may have measures from mostly or kind of entirely unrelated tables. There's somebody who's like works for Major League Baseball. You've got how does weather affect ticket sales, for example, is an example there. Maybe you have survey data and your sales data of how people are using it, or you have your data if you're analyzing of your website, and then you have the survey data of how people are using the website and so on. Connecting those different data sets together. Avoiding those join explosions from large fact-to-fact joins. Being able to relate on individual combinations of fields instead of all the fields together in doing this. And the different levels of detail in the same data source that I exampled. The key point here is this is all happening in the same Tableau data source. So if you don't have access to Tableau data sources to the underlying data at a table level, you're not going to be able to use multi-fact analysis to do that. One thing that can sometimes work here is to work with teams and start using virtual connections that can do things like apply row level security on a table and expose the table to other people. I have a big grain of salt with virtual connections because we've experienced regression bugs in almost every release in working with them. So there's possibilities there. Using Tableau Prep and multi-fact analysis doesn't work because Tableau Prep can't write multiple table extracts, for example. So it starts limiting multi-fact in what we can do. There's a question here, how Sharon asked, how relevant do I feel it will be in my day-to-day work? I've had like one data source so far that I've used multi-fact analysis, that it's like when it works, it's great. But in a lot of other cases, and this is just for me, wrapping my brain around it, I've already built out data sources that are expecting everything to work in a certain way. I've related the tables in a certain way. I can't necessarily just drop in another base table and start using it in a multi-fact way. So it's when I'm building out something new that I start thinking of that as a tool in my toolbox. In terms of thinking about production and using this, this first came out in version 2024.2. Any of us who've used Tableau for a while know anytime Tableau rolls out a big new feature, it takes a little while for them to work out some of the bugs. I'm going to demonstrate one of them right now. With this in the market data, I want to filter my return on ad spend. So I just right click on this, choose filter, and I'm not seeing the range of values of return on ad spend. I'm seeing nulls here in Tableau. It's not properly populating the domain of this filter. And if I go further in this, I will start getting errors and things like that in here. So also, queries aren't necessarily efficiently generated in this. And you've heard me talk a lot about the data model and that we need to understand the data model to do this. New feature in 2025.1, we'll be able to see the data model in a view and get a sense of what tables are in use in that, which is something we've never had. Version 2024.3 added some ability to see the data model of a published data source, which was great. It's still incomplete because we can't see all of the relating fields and any relationship calculations and all of that, but it's a start that Tableau's working on it to help us see more of that. So there is this requirement, if we're going to use relationships and share data sources with other people, if we're going to use multi-fact, we've got to do documentation outside of Tableau to help people understand what's going on. So I will like annotate that data model, for example, that we see here in Miro, or some other kind of mind mapping tool, and just say this is what goes with what and what the intention of each table is, and so on. To do that, and then I'll share that with users of that. Because if I don't, they're going to start dragging out the wrong things, and I'm going to get questions on why are my numbers wrong. So with performance, relationships, multi-fact relationships are computed at the time visualizations refresh. I'm going to go into this a little bit more here. So when we're thinking about, we do all, oh, sorry, that should have been later. There's all these places where we'll be writing calculations inside of Tableau to get things right. I may start out with 40 fields in my data source, and my dashboard ends up with 80 different fields in it from everything I've added just to get everything to work well. Whether that's having to deal with bad data, write stuff for row level security, I need to write ratio calculations or things that are computed at runtime, get the title to look just right the way I want to. So when we start adding relationships, the relationships between those logical tables are computed at runtime. They're not done within the extract. Also, Tableau will change how it generates queries. So for example, if I have a single logical table, Tableau will generate one query when it can for the most efficient totals. If I start using multiple logical tables, Tableau will automatically start generating more queries on here, which can slow down performance. And then we start adding multi-fact into this, then our queries are changing even more. So this line up here about needing to change our data pipelines to use multi-fact, we may need to effectively use that in practice to have dashboards that are performant with the interactivity we want and the display we want. We may need to move more of our processing upstream of Tableau, do more pre-computation for us to get the performance we need out of it. So it's not a drop-in. So last slide here. You got to be comfortable with using relationships before you start using multi-fact. Otherwise, you're going to get lost. You need your data, and this goes to this piece of doing more work in our data pipeline, that your data really needs to be more ready than it might be otherwise to start doing things in Tableau to take advantage of this. In thinking about design, and this goes to that question earlier about using it, so far, I haven't found any place where I would want to modify an existing data source and start using multi-fact. It's really about, I've got a new set of analysis and I'm going to create a new data source, which is maybe mostly duplicating an existing one. But I'm not trying to just modify something in place. Base tables are really fact tables with measures. I've seen Kirk comment here about hiding all those dimension fields from our fact tables. And so and this notion of we have measures from table A, we have measures from table B, and we want to kind of correlate between them in some way and relate that. Shared dimension tables, we've got a lot of dimensions in them, very few measures. And oftentimes in working with this, it's really easy to think about, oh, I'll drag this in and I'll connect this to here and I'll connect this to here and end up with a circular relationship. So it's something that takes some practice. It's not necessarily you get immediately on day one kind of thing. And then my other piece with this is definitely be willing to ask questions and get support on this from the Tableau community. I keep on dropping Kirk's name. He's done more to talk about multi-fact, him and Thomas Nahn, who's the product manager at Tableau, than anybody else at this point. So get support from that. There's companies like mine that can help out with that, or find other users in your organization to work with that on using this. So really powerful feature, also kind of more opportunities for us to make mistakes at the same time with it. So in terms of kind of where Tableau's going, I know Kirk has shared some things with this. I shared a link to this. 2025.1, we get that data model visibility per worksheet, logical table filters. Sometime later this year, being able to basically add another table to a published data source. So starting down that route of composable data sources, where we'll be able to actually relate different published data sources together, that'll come next year. That's been like the #1 feature request on the Tableau forums for a long time now. Tableau's continuing to look at reliability and usability of this. If you find issues as you're going with it, please submit support cases to Tableau so they can improve the quality of the feature, because that's how they're going to know about that. So that's that. I'm just going to see if there's any other questions along the way. And then if anybody has any questions, please jump in if you can unmute yourself. Logical table filters, talked about those, where things are happening. Going through that. Talking about gymnastics to correlate ad spend and things. Hiding fields. Ilya asks, will SenseMakers update its row-level calcs video to incorporate behavior with trees? Probably won't update that video, but we'll have new videos on using relationships, which this will be some of that. Kirk's got a blog post coming up on logical table filters. Great. Sharon had a comment about using multi-fact for exploration. Yes, that's totally a place where being able to just try stuff out and see what works is definitely a use case for multi-fact. And then maybe you go back and do some updates in your data, or realize, oh, in order to resolve a circular join, I need to create a new table or something like that to do that. Is there. So trying it out. In terms of working with survey data, I know Andrew had presented back in December on using relationships with survey data. That are a really fantastic way of setting data models. That's one of the places where if we start adding multi-fact into that, we start after thinking about how the multi-fact is working across the relationships we've already established. So that may be a case where we need to go to kind of the old school single table survey in the just so data that Steve Wexler has shared over the years, versus the relationships, or maybe we can drop them in. And I'm doing the hand wavy kind of thing because it's an experiment, try things out, to be able to use this. Kirk asked, thoughts on grouping fields by folders instead of tables to remove complexity. The part for me with that, I'm just going to switch back to Tableau here, is that I'm going to use my market data rename that I've cleaned up here. If I start grouping fields by folders, but I need to have attention for what are the relationships between the fields to get accurate numbers, I'm losing data to group by folder. If I'm doing this, what's supposed to go with what here? And so maybe it might make sense in some cases if I've documented this, if I've added all the field comments, so when somebody's hovering over this, they're saying this is what this is supposed to be used for, and everything is maybe folders are be useful. So far, at least in my own use, I'm finding keeping it by the data source tables, which is the logical tables, is the way to go here. Yeah, Andrew comments, consistent naming convention. Is Tableau Prep becoming more and more less used now? In the organization that I support, the answer is honestly yes. That Tableau Prep, it can't publish virtual connections, it can't publish multiple table extracts, so data sources that are using relations, it can't, Tableau Prep can't read from data sources that are in relationships. So there's a kind of bifurcation in Tableau right now of these new features that are letting us do more and more advanced data modeling, and Tableau Prep can't keep up. So we're seeing more teams using the Tableau REST and Hyper APIs, which can do all of those, can do at least some of that, though there still isn't the necessary API support for virtual connections as well. Yep. All right. Will we have access to the data models? Yeah, I will share this presentation and this workbook as well, so everybody can see it and play with it. All right. That's all I've got. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Well, thank you, Jonathan. That was fantastic. I learned a lot, and I learned a lot that I still need to learn. So, but now I know where to go, and lots of resources. So we're almost out of time. I want to make sure that we get our swag giveaway in, and that's something important. I'm sure many of you have been hanging out for that. So we made you wait to the end, but hopefully it'll be worth it for one of you. And who has our question? Is it, Sarah, do you have it?
Yeah, Josh, I put it on a slide in the deck. It's on slide, let's see.
Well, I'll just yeah, I see it. I'll just read it. All right. So
Okay.
first person who puts this in the chat, the correct answer to our question will win our swag giveaway. Question is, what are the biggest differences between a data blend and a Tableau relationship? What are the biggest differences between a data blend and a Tableau relationship? Put your answer in the chat. Andrew says blends suck. I mean, I would accept that, but I don't know if that's the one that we're looking for.
So we let Jonathan be the judge.
Or yeah, I mean, I'm not fully equipped, or yeah, he's certainly better equipped to be the judge than I am, I will say.
Tableau to win.
I'm just seeing how things are coming through. I would say, I think just for time, we got to call it. I'd say Kim Ungers.
Ding, ding,
So-
ding,
so-
ding. Winner. Yay, Kim.
Mhm.
So did she nail it, or how would you answer it, Jonathan?
So for my point, data blends are a post-aggregate left join across Tableau data sources, and relationships give us flexibility in the join typing, can even be row level within the same data source. But they're also still fundamentally post-aggregate joins.
All right, well, there you have it.
Excellent. Perfect. I will follow up with you, Kim, to get your prize to you. It's a Tableau store gift card.
Great. Well, we are at time. So one thing I just want to point out, I realized during the session, the reason some of you, I don't know, at least one of you, I know Ali was trying to come off of mute. The reason that you couldn't was because we have all of you as attendees, and so that's a bevy thing, and that we need to make you all as presenters. So that's our lesson learned for next time. So hopefully you come back to our next event in a couple of weeks, and we'll make sure that we get that fixed so that you can come off of mute. So we're at time. Thank you again to Jonathan. Thanks everyone for coming and for your participation. And we will see you all next time. Bye.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.